Hey traders, welcome back to this week's weekly Forex forecast. Last week we had quite a lot going on. We had a ton of news events, and last week was another winning week in the books with GMT members, mainly in the Canadian dollar long theme. Why? Because crude oil has been going higher, and this has been supportive of the Canadian dollar. So buying the Canadian dollar on weakness. Now coming into this week, we're not going to be looking at the Canadian dollar pairs, because last week we did have a pretty hawkish outcome from FOMC. And so coming into this week, the US dollar does replace the Canadian dollar to the long side in the top currencies I'm going to be looking for, which means for those of you who watched last week's video as well, that the euro and the US dollar going into this week are actually currencies that I want to be long in both of them. So what we're looking at here essentially in euro dollar is two strong currencies, or at least one strong currency with the euro and the US dollar, which is getting stronger, paired against each other, meaning that overall, we shouldn't see any major direction in this pair for the time being, and it should hold its range. So what I'm going to be looking for specifically next week in euro dollar is I want to see euro dollar coming down. On balance, I do still favor long positions in this pair. We'd have to trade below the 1.13977. This is where we enter the buy zone below this level. I'm going to be looking, and to the left-hand side, there's a really nice low here and a really nice low here. So if we can push into the buy zone below the 1.13977 and trade into these lows, this is where I'm going to be looking for failed breakouts next week. And I'm going to be looking for a 1 or 2 day liquidation back inside the range in euro dollar. If we end up below the 1.1272, again, this is not expected to happen, trading outside of the larger range, these gold levels, but as a backup plan, this is the second place. I can look for a 1 or 2 day reversal back inside the bigger range, whether I'm long already or not. And the third thing is, with two strong currencies, breakout trading intra-week isn't usually a great idea. You either want to breakout trade kind of commodities or breakout trade very strong versus very weak currencies. So, with euro dollar, we usually look at that kind of intra-week. For this, it would be this kind of channel breakout. But breaking above the moving average follows it, and then you get that kind of hug into it and move away. So that's the kind of intra-week setup here in euro dollar. But with two strong currencies, I would leave the intra-week setup, focusing mainly on this particular setup next week in euro dollar if we can get it. Okay, so moving on to the portfolio selection, and you can see the euro and the Swiss franc are sitting quite obviously at 1 and 2 here in the quantitative data. So I am going to be looking at euro to the long side primarily, Swiss franc to the long side next week primarily. And to the short side, we have a bit more choice here, but certainly the Australian dollar is my #1 short going into this week, and the New Zealand dollar is the #2 short thing. Now, what that means is, for me, especially if we get Aussie or New Zealand strength, then I'm going to be looking to sell into that strength. So those are really the obvious ones going into next week. And that leaves a kind of a third one. Now, last week we were looking at the Canadian dollar, but we did have FOMC last week, and it was a pretty bullish outcome for the dollar. And so coming into this week, here is the choice that we have. To the long side, do I want to be long the Canadian dollar, which, I probably still will look at during the week with members as well. But primarily, I think the US dollar to the long side here is the better one. It's the better third option going into next week. So we'll be looking at US dollar long as a theme also in today's video. And that really leaves one more short. It's not going to be the Canadian dollar. It can either be the yen or the pound. Now, out of the yen and the pound is the one which is more risk on. So if we get some kind of risk off through equities because of an escalation with the ongoing Israel-Iran situation, we could see a flight to safety coming into the yen. So for that reason, I'm just slightly less inclined to short the Japanese yen as I am the pound. So the pound is going to be the #3 currency that I'm going to be looking at to the short side next week. So in summary, I'm going to be looking at, in today's video and at the top of my watch list for trading next week, is going to be EurAusd to the upside, Euro New Zealand to the upside, and Euro Pound to the upside. We're also going to look at Aussie franc to the downside, New Zealand franc to the downside, and pound franc to the downside. And finally, we're going to look at Aussie dollar to the downside, New Zealand dollar to the downside, and pound dollar to the downside for next week. Okay, so kicking off the watch list with crude oil as always, and last week crude oil came down. For those of you who watched last week's video, we're talking about, the escalation of the Iran-Israel situation and how I'm only looking to be long crude oil. We came down last week and traded into the lower bound, and we had a massive rally in crude oil after testing the lower bound after turning into the buy zone last week. So once again, going into this week, I am still only looking for long opportunities in crude oil. I cannot short it. I'd like to see crude oil coming back down, breaching the 69.53 where it enters the buy zone next week. It becomes oversold during the week. And if we can take out this prior low or the major descending triangle low, which we've been looking at in previous videos at the 67.80, this is going to be the area right here that I'm going to be keeping an eye on next week for an attempted breakout below these levels. And I'm going to be looking for sellers to fail. And again, just like last week where we tested the lower bound, turned oversold during the week and then rallied, I'm going to be looking for that 1 to 2 day reversal back inside the range next week. So I can only be a buyer of crude oil next week. I absolutely cannot short it. If we end up below the 65.31, this is where we turn extremely oversold during the week. Unlikely that's going to happen unless you have a major catalyst, which might be something like, you know, an agreement between Iran and Israel and the US, and the whole, you know, situation comes to an end and the price of crude oil collapses. Feasible? Do I think it's going to happen? Probably not. So I don't think we're going to come down below the 65.31, but if we do, it's the second place. I can pull the trigger on a long position for a 1 or 2 day reversal if I so wish. And the third and final thing, of course, with crude oil, great for breakout trading. You get the break back above the moving average after trading below it, attempting to trade into the lower bound, re-breaks, and you can look for that bull flag setup into the profit taking zone, which is the 77.98 next week in crude oil. Okay, so kicking off the Forex universe with the Euro pairs, starting with EurUsd. Now, EurUsd is risk off to the upside. So if we do get a sell-off in equities, you know, if there's any kind of escalation, EurUsd should be supported to the upside. What I like about EurUsd going into next week is as we come down into the buy zone, there's a really nice low right here. And it's kind of the bottom of this almost flat pattern. Price comes up, kind of tests the high, comes back down, tests the low, and then you can see the bounce up here, even for the next leg up. So I would really like to see EurUsd come down, taking out this low right here, and I'm going to be looking for a failed breakout below this low next week, looking for a 1 or 2 day liquidation back inside the range. If we end up below the 1.7481, this is where we become extremely oversold during the week. And there's a really nice low here as well, which I would time an initial position or any secondary position from here on this low. That is the second place I can look for a 1 or 2 day reversal next week in EurUsd. And the third and final thing, of course, you break down below the moving average and then back above it. And you come in, hug the moving average, and you can look for that bull flag setup in EurUsd into the profit target next week at the 1.80429. Next is Euro New Zealand. I can only be a buyer of this market. I cannot sell this market next week either. What I'd like to see is I'd really like to see Euro New Zealand pulling back and breaching the 1.91096, because this is where we enter the buy zone. We become oversold during the week in a market I'm looking to be long. Now, interestingly, we actually have a double bottom breakout here. Here is the confirmation point, and we could very easily get a retest of this kind of double bottom breakout and also kind of turn oversold during the week. So I will be looking for this to hold, be looking for double bottoms, inverse head and shoulders, dropping down to lower time frames, 15 minutes, 5 minutes or lower, and looking for those patterns, looking for the sellers to start to get exhausted and pull their positions, getting that 1 or 2 day reversal to the upside in this market. The point at which we turn extremely oversold, so again, I'm not expecting this to happen, but just as a kind of plan B, as a backup plan, if we get to the 1.8901, it is the second place I can pull the trigger on a long position. And the third and final thing, of course, as always, we make our way down towards the lower bound, but we don't take it out. And we get this kind of fast market where it re-breaks. And you can look for that bull flag setup in Euro New Zealand into the profit taking target next week at the 1.95250. Next is Euro Pound. Now I can only be a buyer of this market as well next week. And again, like the other Euro pairs we just looked at, they're all risk off to the upside. So should any kind of escalation happen between Iran, Israel, the US, etc., and stocks in the US sell off, Euro Pound should be supported to the upside like all of the other Euro pairs we just looked at. What I'd really like to see is I'd like to see this come down, and there's a really nice low just here. This is the low I'm primarily going to be looking to time any reversal from, looking for sellers to try and push through here next week in the sell zone. And I'm going to be looking for that 1 or 2 day reversal to the upside. And that's the exact setup we're looking at every single day with members in the real-time setups in GMT. That's what I'm going to be looking for. That's the low I'm going to attempt to time any reversal from in Euro Pound next week. If we end up below the 0.84601, as always, I don't expect this to happen, but it is the second place. We can look for a long opportunity for a 1 or 2 day reversal. And the third and final thing, as always, is that kind of intra-week breakout where we make our way down and then we re-break back above. And you get that kind of bull flag set up. You know, people like to trade Fibonacci, this kind of thing, into the 0.86187 profit taking zone in euro pound next week. Moving on to the Swiss franc pairs, and I can only be short Aussie franc or do nothing. And this is my favorite short going into next week with the Swiss franc pairs. What I'd like to see is, as always, I'd like to see this come up, enter the sell zone at 0.53435. And this would be a fantastic place to start to look for an attempted breakout, because if we get buyers pushing into this high and struggling, and that's what I'm going to be looking for, because, you know, why would they struggle here? Well, this market is already overbought during the week. Now they're starting to break this high, they start to fail. That's the setup I'm going to be looking at next week in real time with GMT members for a 1 or 2 day liquidation to the downside. If we end up above the 0.54165, this is where we become extremely overbought during the week. It is the second place I can pull the trigger on a short position. And the third and final thing is we break up towards the upper bound as always, and you can look for the re-break back down below. And again, usually you only get in the 4-hour time frame, you know, one of these bull flags or bear flags during the week. Profit taking target to the downside is 0.51975. Next is New Zealand franc. Now this is a market, every time it pops, it drops. It pops higher, drops down, pops higher, drops down, pops higher, drops down, pops higher, drops down. So what I want to see next week is exactly the same thing. I want to see this market popping higher, attempting the breakout above this high right here. This high sits right on the edge of the sell zone at 0.49431. And I'm going to be looking for an attempted breakout above this high. And I'm going to be looking for buyers to start to get trapped and to pull their positions and fail and look for that reversal back inside the range for a 1 or 2 day liquidation. If we end up above the 0.5010, that's where we become extremely overbought. During the week, I can pull the trigger on a second position if I so wish, or just a good initial position to take a short from if we get there. Not expected to take these gold levels out, as I say, but if we do get there, you know, I'm not really short. Fantastic place for a first initial short position. And the third and final thing is the breakout above the moving average and back down below it, giving you that kind of bear flag setup into the profit taking zone down here at 0.4809 next week in New Zealand franc. And the final Swiss franc pair we're going to look at is pound franc. Now again, I can only be short this market or do nothing with it. I cannot buy this market under any circumstances next week. There's a really nice high right here. This is the high next week. If we can enter the sell zone, and of course this is all reactively, you know, if we start to push into this zone, then I'm going to start to look for a certain setup. You know, then I'm going to start to look, once we trade above the 1.11060, for an attempted breakout above this high. And this is where I'm going to look for buyers to get trapped, to pull their positions, looking for that 1 or 2 day reversal to the downside. The overbought level is the 1.11060, and the extremely overbought level is the 1.1212. So that is the second place I can look for a 1 or 2 day reversal to the downside if it gets there. Don't expect it to get there. I think, you know, primarily this is the setup I'll be focused on next week. But you may also get a fast market where you break up and then re-break the moving average, giving you that kind of bear flag setup. And you're not going to get a bear flag or a bull flag every week in every market. But what you want to do is you want to have that in your arsenal if you are trading breakouts or Fibonacci's. So when you start to see them developing in one pair or another, then you can reactively jump in when the setup occurs. So going to be looking for any move in that scenario down to the 1.0893 profit taking target to the downside in pound franc next week. Okay, so moving on to the US dollar pairs before heading over to gold and silver, starting with Aussie dollar. This market is a short or do nothing for me. And we are starting to break down, you know, from the highs. It's been quite choppy, but we are starting to get weakness in since we had FOMC. And again, expecting, sort of anticipating some dollar strength coming into this week. So what I'd like to see therefore is an attempted break above the high, which is right here. And you can see actually this is multiple attempts to break this high. So you push up, kind of rejects down, push up, rejects down, pushes up, rejects down. But if I'm looking for a failed breakout, I want to take really the highest high over here. So if we can push in and take this and I start to see dollar weakness, even though I'm anticipating dollar strength, Then as we get dollar weakness, I'm going to be anticipating the dollar strength to come in and looking for that failed breakout above this high. This is where I'm going to be looking next week for a 1 or 2 day reversal to the downside. And again, this is not theory, guys. This is stuff that I'm doing in real time with GMT members every single week. This is practical, it's repetitive, and it's consistent. You can do this over and over and over again. You'll see this every single week. Opportunities pretty much every single week. Very rare not to get any of these opportunities in a given week. So going to be looking for that to the downside. The 0.66284 is the place we turn extremely overbought during the week. So although I don't expect it to get here, it is the second place I can pull the trigger on a short position if I so wish. If we do end up there, you know, kind of 5% of the time or less, that's expected to happen. And if we get, you know, a faster market, so instead of pulling back, you just see this kind of pullback, chop around its moving average, and then you get the next leg down with momentum. That's where you can look for that bear flag into the profit taking target. And there's a really nice low just here that you can time any profit taking with below the 0.63645. Next is New Zealand dollar. Again, I can only be a seller of this asset next week. So I want to see this turn overbought during the week, which is above the 0.60549. And I want to see it take out at least this high, preferably this high. And this is where I'm going to begin to look. So we push up, I have an alert set at this level, it triggers, then I start to look, okay, for this kind of setup. Looking for these highs to the left-hand side to be broken, and for buyers to start to run out of steam. You're developing those head and shoulders, double top kind of patterns when that happens, and then you get the liquidation 1 or 2 day reversal to the downside. If we end up above the 0.61377, that is where we turn extremely overbought during the week. Don't expect it to get there, but as always, I can pull the trigger on a short position from above that level as well. And if you get that kind of bear flag breakouts, you pull back. Maybe we do, you know, near term double bottom, pull back, and then you get the re-break during the week with momentum, especially if the US dollar starts to pick up steam. That's going to be the opportunity you can look for to the downside, the 0.58895. And there's also a couple of lows down here you can time any profit taking with in New Zealand dollar next week. And last but not least, before we move on to gold and silver, is pound dollar. Now, pound dollar is a short for me next week. I cannot buy this asset under any circumstances, regardless of what happens. So I want to see this turn overbought during the week. Once we enter the sell zone, that's my cue to start to look for these potential reversals. So I'm going to be looking for a breach of the 1.35888, and I'm going to be looking at this high and also this high, very close to the prior high. So these are the highs I'm going to be looking at next week for pound dollar to attempt to break out. Then I'm going to be looking for buyers to fail, and that is where I'm going to be looking to get paid on that liquidation next week for 1 or 2 days to the downside. If we trade above the 1.37231, it's the second place. I can look for a short position if I so wish, but I don't expect it to actually get there. And you can see we're already kind of bear flagging, big one here, sell off, and then we kind of consolidate. You could see this pull back, and then you get the next leg down, right? And it's kind of a breakout of this kind of near-term channel like this. The moving average should follow it, and then you get that pullback, kind of a mini bear flag after a breakout of a bigger bear flag into the profit taking zone next week at the 1.3320. Okay, so wrapping up the video with gold and silver, and I do still have a long bias on both gold and silver, looking for bullish opportunities. However, just bear in mind, we are starting to see the US dollar strengthening quantitatively. And what that means going into next week and subsequent weeks is that it can start to become a headwind for gold and silver to the upside. So gold and silver tend to outperform the best when the dollar's weak. They can still go up with the dollar going up, but it becomes a bit more difficult for them. So just bear that in mind if you are being long or looking for long opportunities next week in gold and silver or over the next couple of weeks. What I would like to see is, despite the fact we are starting to get a stronger dollar, I'd like to see gold coming down, breaching the 329818 and taking out this support level right here. That support level is where I'm going to be looking for sellers of gold next week to get trapped. So I'm going to look for them to attempt to break out down below this, and this is where I'm going to be looking for a 1 or 2 day reversal to the upside. If we end up below the 321927, I don't see this happening. You'd probably need to have some kind of catalyst for it to do that, and I don't see exactly what that could be next week. But that would be the second place I could pull the trigger on a long position for one or two reversal, because we become extremely oversold once we trade down below here in any given week. And again, with commodities, they work very well with breakouts. So you could look for the move down and the break back above the moving average. The moving average follows it, and you get that kind of bull flag set up into the profit taking target and the prior high in gold next week at 3456.01. And last but not least, we have silver. Now, when the dollar is weak, I tend to sort of prefer silver longs, and when the dollar starts to strengthen, I prefer gold longs. So on balance, probably I prefer gold longs next week. However, if silver can come down and take out the lower bound of the 34.24 and turn oversold during the week, then I will start to look. And what I notice here is there's a really nice low here and a really nice low here. So these are the two levels I'm going to be looking for silver to come down. I'm going to be looking for silver sellers to start to get trapped. First here, and if they go straight through it, then I'll be looking for here. And this is where I'd be interested in looking for a 1 or 2 day reversal to the upside in silver next week. If we end up below the 32.52, we turn extremely oversold. I can pull the trigger on a long position from down below there as well, but I don't expect silver to come down here. And the third and final thing, we're already below the moving average, so you can look for the breakout intra-week with momentum. And you see here, we break above it with momentum, and then you get this kind of consolidation. Doesn't touch it here, but it kind of hugs it, and then you get the next leg up. So you can look for that bull flag setup. But again, the key is you want to see momentum. It has to be strong momentum, and then you get that bull flag set up into the profit taking zone next week in silver at the 37.70. So that is it from me for today, guys. As always, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, why not consider joining us in the GMT training room each day, where I look at the best markets as well as sharing real-time setups that I'm personally looking at trading with members as part of our GMT training program. Don't forget, you can also get a 2-week free trial to the cutting-edge hedge-trading app used in today's video by heading over to www.hedge-.com. Access to the cutting-edge hedge-platform is included with every GMT membership.